The stagecoach lurched over another rut, and Nora Calloway's head cracked against the wooden frame hard enough to make her vision blur. She didn't complain. Complaining required energy she'd stopped wasting 3 states ago. Across from her, a cattle merchant snored with his mouth open, filling the cramped compartment with breath that smelled like whiskey and rotting teeth. Beside him, a woman in an expensive traveling coat held a perfumed handkerchief to her nose and stared out the window with the practiced indifference of someone who'd learned to ignore unpleasant things. Nora had learned that skill too, though not by choice. She pressed her palm against the leather satchel on her lap. Everything she owned in the world condensed into one bag that weighed less than hope and more than pride. Inside were 3 dresses, a sewing kit, her mother's silver thimble, and the letter that had changed everything. Mrs. Calloway, your arrangement with Mr. Harlan Greer is confirmed. Stage arrives Sorrow Creek the 14th. Someone will meet you. Reverend Morris. 17 words. That's all it took to reshape a life. The woman with the perfumed handkerchief finally spoke without looking at Nora. You're the mail-order bride? It wasn't a question. Nora kept her expression neutral. I'm traveling to meet my husband, yes. Harlan Greer's place? The woman's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, something colder. I heard about his situation. 6 boys and a failing ranch. You must be desperate. The cattle merchant stirred, cracking one bloodshot eye. Or stupid. Nora's fingers tightened on her satchel, but her voice stayed level. I'm neither desperate nor stupid. I'm practical. Practical. The woman tested the word like it tasted bitter. Is that what you call marrying a man you've never met? Moving to the edge of nowhere to raise someone else's children? I call it survival, Nora said quietly. Same as anything else. The truth was more complicated, but these strangers didn't deserve it. They didn't need to know about the factory fire in St. Louis that took her husband and left her with debts she couldn't pay. They didn't need to know about the landlord who'd suggested alternative arrangements for rent. They didn't need to know that the choice wasn't between marriage and freedom, it was between marriage and streets. So yes, she was practical. The stagecoach crested a hill, and Sorrow Creek came into view. Nora's first thought was that someone had given the town the wrong name. It should have been called Surrender, or maybe Dust. Buildings leaned against each other like drunks trying to stay upright. The main street looked more like a suggestion than a road, barely visible under layers of dirt that seemed permanent. A few horses stood tied outside what might have been a saloon, too tired to swish their tails at flies. Welcome to paradise, the cattle merchant muttered, finally sitting up. The woman with the handkerchief gathered her belongings with practiced efficiency. The hotel is passable if you're not particular, which you shouldn't be. This far west, particular gets you nowhere. The stage rolled to a stop outside a building that proclaimed itself the general store in faded letters. The driver's boots hit the ground with a heavy thud, followed by the creak of the door opening. Sorrow Creek, he announced unnecessarily. Watch your step. Nora climbed down, her legs stiff from 3 days of travel. The street was empty except for a man leaning against a post outside the saloon, watching her with the kind of interest that made her skin crawl. She turned away, focusing instead on retrieving her bag from the back of the coach. You Mrs. Greer? The voice came from behind her, young, male, and carefully neutral. Nora turned to find a boy of maybe 16 watching her with eyes that looked decades older. He was tall and lean in the way of someone who'd grown fast and hadn't filled out yet. His clothes were clean but worn. His hat sat at an angle that might have been careless, except his posture was anything but. I'm Nora Calloway, she said. Soon to be Mrs. Greer, I suppose. Thomas. He didn't offer his hand. I'm supposed to bring you to the ranch. You're Harlan's son. Oldest one. He picked up her bag before she could protest, testing its weight with a slight frown. This all you got? I travel light. Good. Ranch ain't got room for extra. He turned and started walking toward a wagon hitched to 2 horses that had seen better days. Nora followed, acutely aware of eyes tracking her movement. The man outside the saloon, a woman sweeping a porch, 2 children who stopped playing to stare. The mail-order bride had arrived. Entertainment for a town starved of novelty. Thomas loaded her bag with more care than his attitude suggested, then climbed up to the driver's seat. Nora pulled herself up beside him without waiting for help. She'd learned years ago that waiting for help was often the same as waiting for nothing. The wagon lurched forward, and Sorrow Creek began to recede behind them. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were hoofbeats, creaking wood, and wind that carried dust instead of mercy. The land stretched out in every direction, flat, brown, stubborn. Here and there, patches of scrub brush clung to life with what looked like spite rather than hope. "How far?" Nora finally asked. 6 miles. Thomas kept his eyes forward. "Road gets rough about halfway." "Rough compared to what we just traveled?" His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "You'll see." More silence. Nora studied him from the corner of her eye. He held the reins with practiced ease, his jaw tight, his shoulders carrying weight that had nothing to do with physical labor. This was a boy who'd been forced to become a man too soon, and the transformation hadn't been kind. "Your father," she began carefully. "What should I know about him?" "He works hard. Expects the same from everyone else." Thomas's tone flattened. "That's about it." "And your brothers?" "There's 5 of them. They're around." The vagueness was deliberate. Nora let it sit between them for a moment before trying again. The Reverend's letter mentioned 6 boys total. Eli's 15, Cade's 12, Porter's 9, Reeves 7, Rue's 4. Thomas rattled off the names like a roster. "You'll meet them soon enough." "What happened to your mother?" The question hung in the air too long. Thomas's hands tightened on the reins, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger exactly, but a door slamming shut. "She died 2 years back, fever." He glanced at Nora briefly, and his eyes were hard. "Don't expect us to call you Ma. That ain't happening." "I wouldn't ask you to." "Good." They hit the rough patch of road Thomas had mentioned, and Nora understood why he'd smirked. The wagon jolted over ruts deep enough to crack axles, bouncing them both like stones in a jar. She gripped the seat, her teeth rattling, and wondered if this was some kind of test. When the road finally smoothed, relatively speaking, Thomas spoke again, softer this time. "Why'd you agree to this?" Nora considered lying, considered the easy answer about fresh starts and new opportunities. But something in the boy's question felt genuine, and he'd probably heard enough lies to recognize them. "Because staying where I was would have killed me," she said simply. "Maybe not right away, but eventually." Thomas nodded slowly, like that made sense to him. "Ranch might kill you faster." "Maybe." Nora looked out at the unforgiving land. "But at least I'll have tried something different first." Another almost smile crossed his face, gone before it fully formed. They continued in silence, but it felt different now, less hostile, more like 2 people who'd recognized something familiar in each other, the exhaustion of surviving. The Greer Ranch appeared gradually, rising from the landscape like something that had grown there by accident. The main house was larger than Nora expected, but in worse condition. Planks had been nailed over planks to patch holes. The roof sagged in the middle. One shutter hung at an angle, held by a single hinge. Outbuildings clustered around the main structure, a barn missing half its doors, a chicken coop held together with wire and prayer, a smokehouse that leaned so far it looked drunk. Fencing stretched across the property in various states of collapse, marking boundaries that seemed more wishful than actual. And everywhere, dust, dirt, the residue of drought and defeat. "Home," Thomas said without inflection. Nora climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady. The front door of the house opened, and boys spilled out like water from a cracked jug. Too many, too fast, all talking at once until they spotted her and went silent. She counted them quickly. 5, not 6. 1 missing. The tallest after Thomas, Eli, she guessed, stood with his arms crossed, expression suspicious. Beside him, a boy with sharp features and sharper eyes watched her like she might steal something. 2 younger ones hung back, half hidden behind their brothers. The smallest was nowhere in sight. "This is her?" the sharp-eyed one asked Thomas. "Yeah." Thomas grabbed Nora's bag. "Nora Calloway, she's—" "The new wife," Eli finished. His tone made it sound like a transaction. "Pa inside?" "South pasture. Won't be back till dark." Nora stepped forward, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I'm pleased to meet you all. I know this is strange, but I hope—" "We don't need hope," the sharp-eyed boy interrupted. "We need someone who can cook and clean without making things worse." "Cade," Thomas said sharply. Shut it. Cade didn't shut it. What? It's true. Last woman who came out here lasted 3 days before she ran back to town crying about how we were animals. That was a housekeeper, Eli said. Not. Same difference. Cade's eyes stayed on Nora. You know how to cook? Yes? For 8 people? If that's what's needed. You know how to sew? Mend clothes? Fix things that break every damn day? Cade, Thomas warned again. But Nora held up a hand. I know how to sew. I worked in a dress shop for 6 years before I was married the first time. I can mend anything that can be mended. And yes, I can cook for 8 people, or 10, or however many need feeding. Cade studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. We'll see. The younger boys still hadn't spoken. Nora crouched down slightly, trying to make herself less imposing. You must be Porter and Reeve. The taller of the two nodded. 9 years old, Thomas had said. Porter. His eyes were wide and cautious, like a deer deciding whether to bolt. I'm Porter, he confirmed quietly. That's Reeve. Reeve said nothing, just stared at her with an expression Nora couldn't quite read. Not hostile, not welcoming, something else entirely. Where's the youngest? Nora asked, standing. Rue? The boys exchanged glances. Thomas sighed. Probably in the kitchen. He's always in there around supper time. He cooks? Nora couldn't hide her surprise. Tries to. Eli's voice was flat. Usually makes a mess, but at least he tries. Nora's chest tightened. A 4-year-old trying to cook supper because no one else had time. She'd seen poverty before, seen families stretched beyond breaking, but something about that image hit harder than expected. Show me inside, she said. Thomas led the way. The house smelled like wood smoke, unwashed laundry, and something burnt. The main room was larger than the exterior suggested, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a rough wooden table surrounded by mismatched chairs. Dishes were stacked haphazardly. Dust coated every surface. A basket of mending sat in the corner, overflowing, and in the kitchen, barely visible over the counter, stood the smallest boy Nora had ever seen trying to cook. Rue had dragged a stool to the stove and stood on it, stirring something in a pot too large for his hands. His face was red from heat and concentration. His sleeves were rolled up past his elbows. He was so focused he didn't notice them at first. Then he looked up and Nora saw what would haunt her for weeks. Not fear, not curiosity. Resignation. The expression of a child who'd already learned that adults rarely helped when you needed them most. Hi, Rue said softly. Are you the new Ma? I'm Nora. She moved closer slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. What are you making? Beans. He stirred again, his small arms straining. They're supposed to be soft, but I don't think I did it right. They're still hard. Nora looked into the pot. The beans were indeed hard, because they'd been cooking without enough water and were now starting to burn at the bottom. She could smell it. May I? She asked gently. Rue hesitated, then nodded and stepped back. Nora took the spoon, added water from the bucket, adjusted the heat, and scraped the bottom to prevent further burning. The beans were salvageable. Barely. You did well getting them started, she told Rue, but beans need more water and lower heat, or they turn into rocks. I didn't know. His voice was so quiet she almost missed it. Now you do. Nora glanced around the kitchen, taking inventory. Limited supplies. Less organization. No real system for anything. Have you eaten today? Rue shook his head. None of you have eaten? She turned to face the older boys who'd gathered in the doorway watching. Pa left bread this morning, Thomas said defensively. We had that. Bread for 6 growing boys. 1 meal. Nora felt something sharp and angry rise in her chest. Not at them. At the situation that had taught children to accept hunger as normal. That's not enough. It's what we got, Cade said with a shrug. It's what you had, Nora corrected. Now you have me. She rolled up her sleeves. The kitchen was a disaster, but Nora had worked with worse. She sent Thomas to the smokehouse for salt pork, had Eli fetch vegetables from the root cellar, half of them borderline rotten, but enough were salvageable. Put Cade on water duty. Told Porter to clear the table and Reeve to gather clean plates if any existed. Rue stayed beside her, watching everything with those enormous eyes. Can I help? He asked. You can hand me things when I need them, Nora said. But first tell me, when's the last time you had a real meal? Not... Not bread, a real meal. Rue thought about it. Christmas? It was March. Nora's hands paused for just a second before continuing. Well, we're fixing that tonight. She worked quickly, efficiently, the muscle memory of years spent in kitchens coming back like breathing. The beans were seasoned and set to simmer properly. Salt pork was diced and fried until crispy. Vegetables were chopped and added to everything, bulking out the portions. She found flour and started biscuits, working the dough with practiced hands while keeping everything else going simultaneously. The boys drifted in and out, pretending they had other things to do but really watching her work. Even Cade, who'd been so skeptical earlier, lingered by the doorway longer than necessary. "You really worked in a dress shop?" Eli asked at one point. "For 6 years, made everything from work dresses to wedding gowns." Nora shaped another biscuit. "Why?" "Just seems weird. Going from fancy dresses to this." He gestured vaguely at the kitchen, the house, the whole situation. "Life's weird," Nora said. "You adjust or you don't. Those are the options." Eli considered this, then nodded and disappeared back outside. As the sun began setting, the smell of real food filled the house for the first time in months. Nora set the table herself, proper settings, everything in its place, then called the boys in. They came slowly, uncertain, like they didn't quite believe what was happening. "Sit," Nora instructed. They sat. She served each of them, generous portions, the kind that said you matter, you're worth feeding properly. Rue got extra because he was so small. Thomas got extra because he was still growing and working like a man. Everyone got biscuits hot from the oven. For a moment, nobody moved. They just stared at the food. "Well," Nora prompted, "it won't eat itself?" Thomas picked up his fork first, took a bite. His expression shifted, surprise, then something else, something that looked dangerously close to relief. "It's good," he said quietly. The other boys dug in. Within seconds, the only sound was eating, not polite, not refined, but hungry and genuine. Nora watched them and felt something loosen in her chest. This was what they needed. Not perfection, not someone to replace what they'd lost, just someone who gave a damn enough to try. She was plating her own food when the front door opened. Every boy went still. Harlan Greer stepped inside. Nora's first thought was that he looked exactly like the land he worked. Worn down, stubborn, refusing to quit even when quitting made sense. He was tall but stooped, like someone who'd spent too many years bent over hard labor. His face was weathered, creased with lines that spoke of sun and worry in equal measure. His clothes were filthy with dirt and sweat and what might have been blood. He stopped when he saw everyone at the table. His eyes moved from his sons to Nora, to the food, to back to his sons. "What's this?" he asked. His voice was rough, unused to much beyond commands. "Supper," Thomas said. Harlan's gaze landed on Nora. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two strangers bound by necessity and a proxy marriage neither of them had wanted, but both had needed. "You're Nora," he said finally. "I am." "You cooked this?" "I did." Harlan moved to the table slowly, like he didn't quite trust what he was seeing. He sat in what was clearly his chair, the one at the head, more worn than the others. Nora served him without asking, the same generous portion she'd given his sons. He picked up his fork, took a bite, chewed slowly. The room held its breath. Then Harlan set down his fork and spoke words that cut through the silence like a declaration. "This is the best meal I've had in a long time." It wasn't flowery, wasn't poetic, but coming from this man who looked like he'd forgotten how to say anything kind, it landed with weight. Thomas glanced at Nora with something that might have been respect. Cade stopped looking suspicious. Even Rue smiled. Harlan ate without speaking again, but the tension had shifted. Not gone. This family had too much history for tension to simply evaporate, but changed into something different. Something that acknowledged Nora wasn't a threat or a replacement. She was just someone trying to help. After supper, the boys scattered to evening chores. Harlan remained at the table, nursing coffee that Nora had made strong the way working men needed it. She cleaned the kitchen, acutely aware of his presence, but refusing to be intimidated by it. "Reverend Morris sent word about you," Harlan said eventually. "Said you were a widow, seamstress." "I was both those things." Nora scrubbed a pot. "Still am a seamstress if needed." "You know what you're getting into here?" A failing ranch, 6 boys, and a town that probably thinks I'm desperate or insane. She looked at him directly. That about cover it? Harlan's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Close enough? Then yes, I know what I'm getting into. Why agree to it? The same question Thomas had asked. Nora gave Harlan the same answer. Because staying where I was would have killed me eventually. This way, at least I'm trying something different. Harlan studied her for a long moment. You're tougher than you look. I'd have to be to survive St. Louis. This ranch can't be worse than that. You'd be surprised. He stood, draining his coffee. We'll do the marriage proper tomorrow. Reverend can come out. Make it legal. All right? Boys sleep upstairs. Your room's at the end of the hall. He pulled a rusted iron key from his pocket and set it on the table between them. Door locks if you want privacy. Nora picked up the key. It was heavy. Old. The kind of thing that had seen decades of use. Thank you. Harlan nodded and headed for the door, then paused. Nora. Yes? Whatever else happens, thank you for supper. Boys needed that. Then he was gone, disappeared into the night to check on something that probably didn't need checking, but gave him an excuse to be alone. Nora finished cleaning, then made her way upstairs. The hallway was narrow and dark. She could hear the boys in their rooms, soft conversations, the creak of beds, the sounds of children settling for sleep. Her room was at the very end. She unlocked the door with the iron key and stepped inside. It was small, sparse. A bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over land too dark to see. Someone, probably Thomas, had left her bag on the bed. Nora sat down, the key still in her hand, and felt the weight of everything crash into her at once. She had married a man she'd just met, agreed to raise 6 boys who didn't want a new mother, moved to the edge of civilization where one bad season could mean starvation. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else, something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. These boys needed someone. This family was breaking apart slowly, held together by nothing but Harlan's stubborn refusal to quit and Thomas's premature adulthood. The ranch was failing, the town was dying, everything was balanced on the edge of collapse. But Nora had built a life from nothing before. She'd survived a factory fire, widowhood, poverty, and predatory landlords. She'd stitched dresses with hands that bled. She'd gone hungry so others could eat. She was still standing, and if she could survive all that, she could survive this. Nora set the key on the dresser and began unpacking her life. Downstairs, Rue's voice drifted up through the floorboards, asking Thomas if the new lady was staying. Thomas's response was too quiet to hear, but it must have been reassuring because Rue went silent after that. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. In the distance, a coyote called, and Nora Calloway, the mail-order bride from St. Louis, closed her eyes and let herself believe, just for tonight, that maybe she'd made the right choice after all. The ranch wouldn't fix itself. The boys wouldn't heal overnight. Harlan wouldn't suddenly become easy to live with. But Nora had opened the door with that rusted iron key, expecting just a room. What she'd found instead was something much more dangerous. A family that needed her. And Nora had never been good at walking away from people who needed her, even when she should, especially when she should. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, she let herself rest. And in that small room at the end of the hallway, surrounded by dust and darkness and the ghosts of a family's grief, Nora Calloway finally allowed herself to hope. Not for happiness, not for perfection, just for the chance to build something worth keeping, even if it killed her, especially if it meant saving them first. Morning came too early and too cold. Nora woke to the sound of boots on floorboards, heavy, deliberate, the rhythm of men who'd been rising before dawn their entire lives. She dressed quickly in the dim light, her fingers stiff from cold as she pinned her hair back. The mirror above the dresser showed a woman who looked older than 32, but that was nothing new. Hard living aged you faster than time ever could. Downstairs, she found Harlan already gone and the boys moving through morning routines with mechanical efficiency. Thomas was outside dealing with livestock. Eli pumped water into buckets. Kate had disappeared somewhere. The younger one sat at the table looking half asleep and wholly miserable. No one had started breakfast. Nora surveyed the kitchen. Yesterday's success felt like a distant dream now, facing the reality of feeding 8 people every single day with supplies that wouldn't last the month if she wasn't careful. "Anyone know what there is to work with?" she asked. Porter pointed vaguely toward the pantry. "Whatever's in there. Pa buys supplies when he goes to town, but that's not regular." Nora opened the pantry and bit back a curse. Flour, nearly gone. Cornmeal, maybe enough for a few more days. Dried beans, which took hours to cook properly. Some salt pork that had seen better months. A few wrinkled potatoes. That was it. This wasn't a pantry. It was a countdown to starvation. "When's your father going to town next?" she asked. Porter shrugged. "Depends on money, and if the work gets done, and if nothing breaks that needs fixing worse." Translation: not soon enough. Nora started coffee first, strong enough to wake the dead, then began working with what she had. Cornmeal mush wasn't elegant, but it was filling. She fried the last of the salt pork to give it flavor, added the potatoes diced small, stretched everything as far as it would go. Eli came in carrying water, his shirt already soaked with sweat despite the cold. He set the buckets down and watched Nora work. "You don't have to do this every day," he said. "Do what?" "Cook. Thomas can make enough to keep us going." Nora glanced at him. "Can he make enough to keep you healthy, growing properly, or just enough to keep you breathing?" Eli didn't answer. "That's what I thought." She stirred the pot. "Where's Cade?" "Probably off sulking somewhere. He does that." "About what?" "Everything." Eli leaned against the counter. "He doesn't trust people much, especially not people who show up claiming they want to help." "I'm not claiming anything. I am helping." "Yeah, well, we've heard that before." Thomas came through the door then, stamping mud off his boots. He looked exhausted already, and the sun had barely risen. "2 fence posts down in the east pasture," he announced to no one in particular. "Cattle got through. Took me an hour to round them back up." "I'll fix the fence after breakfast," Eli offered. "We both will. It's a 2-person job." Thomas noticed Nora at the stove. "You didn't have to make breakfast." "Someone had to. I would have handled it." "I know." Nora plated food and started setting it out. "But you've got enough to handle. Let me do this part." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue, then just nodded and sat down. The younger boys drifted in, drawn by the smell of food. Rue climbed into his chair and watched Nora with those enormous eyes that seemed to absorb everything. "Where's your father?" Nora asked. "South pasture," Thomas said around a mouthful of food. "Checking on the sick cattle." "Sick how?" "Some kind of fever. Started 2 weeks ago. Lost 3 already." Nora's hands paused. Sick cattle meant less meat, less milk, less income. It meant the gap between survival and collapse getting narrower. "Has anyone tried to treat them?" Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "With what? We can't afford a veterinarian, can barely afford feed. There must be something." "There isn't." His voice went flat. "We just wait and hope they either get better or die quick so they don't suffer." The table went quiet. Even the younger boys stopped eating. Nora set down the spoon. "That's it? You just accept it?" "What else are we supposed to do?" Eli asked. "Pray for a miracle? Those don't happen out here." "Have you asked other ranchers what they do?" "Other ranchers don't talk to us much anymore," Thomas said. "We're the family that's failing. Nobody wants that to be contagious." Cade appeared in the doorway then, looking like he'd been up for hours. His clothes were dirty, his hair a mess, but his eyes were sharp. "Talking about how much everyone hates us?" he asked casually. "Fun breakfast topic." "Sit down and eat," Nora said. "Not hungry." "Sit down anyway." Cade hesitated, then slouched into a chair with exaggerated reluctance. Nora put food in front of him. He stared at it like it might bite him, then picked up his fork. "We don't need pity," he said. "Good thing I'm not offering any." Nora sat down with her own plate. "I'm offering food. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes. Pity is feeling sorry for someone from a distance. Food is standing in a kitchen at dawn making sure you don't starve. One's useless. The other keeps you alive." Cade considered this, then started eating. "You're weird." "I've been called worse." After breakfast, the boys scattered to their various tasks. Nora tackled the disaster that was the rest of the house. Laundry had piled up to the point where some of it had started developing its own ecosystem. Dishes from previous meals sat crusted with food. Dust covered every surface thick enough to write in. She started with laundry, hauling water and heating it in the big pot over the fire. Her hands were raw within an hour. The lye soap they had was harsh, stripping skin as efficiently as it cleaned clothes. But she kept working, scrubbing shirts and pants and linens that hadn't seen proper cleaning in months. Rue appeared beside her while she was wringing out a shirt. "Can I help?" he asked. Nora looked down at the 4-year-old who'd been trying to cook dinner on a stool yesterday. "You can hand me things from that basket when I'm ready for them. Think you can do that?" Rue nodded seriously and took up his position. They worked in silence for a while. Nora washed, Rue handed her items, and slowly the pile of clean laundry grew while the pile of dirty shrank. "Why'd you come here?" Rue asked suddenly. "Your father needed a wife. I needed a place to go. But why here? This place is—" He struggled for the word. "It's broken." Nora paused, a wet shirt dripping in her hands. "Most places are broken in some way. The question is whether you try to fix them or just live with the breaking. Pa says some things can't be fixed." "Your pa's wrong about that." Rue looked up at her with surprise. "You can't say that. Pa's always right." "No one's always right, honey. Not your pa, not me, not anyone." She went back to scrubbing. "But we can still try to do better than we did yesterday. That's all fixing really is." Before Rue could respond, shouting erupted from outside. Nora dropped the laundry and ran toward the sound, Rue right behind her. She found Thomas and Eli in the yard, facing off like they were about to throw punches. Harlan stood between them, looking more tired than angry. "I'm telling you it's a waste of time," Eli was saying, his voice raised. "The fence has been patched 6 times already. It's not going to hold." "Then we patch it a 7th time," Thomas shot back. "What else are we supposed to do? Let the cattle wander off? We should sell them while they're still worth something and use the money to fix the real problems. The cattle are the only thing keeping us afloat." "Barely. And half of them are sick anyway." Thomas took a step forward. "You want to give up? Is that it? Just quit like—" "Like what?" Eli's face flushed. "Like Ma did? That what you were going to say?" The air went electric. Harlan's expression darkened. "Ma didn't quit," Thomas said quietly, dangerously. "She died. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because it feels the same from where I'm standing. One day she was here, next day she wasn't, and everything fell apart." Thomas moved fast. Eli moved faster. Within seconds they were on the ground, grappling and throwing punches that connected more with dirt than flesh. Harlan tried to separate them, shouting orders that neither boy heard. Nora grabbed the bucket of water she'd been using for laundry and threw it over both of them. They sputtered and separated, shocked into stillness. "Are you finished?" Nora asked calmly. Thomas glared at her, dripping. "This isn't your business. You're fighting in the yard at 9 in the morning over a fence. That makes it my business." She set down the bucket. "Now someone explain what this is actually about, because I know it's not about cattle or fencing." Neither boy spoke. Harlan looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Nora crossed her arms and waited. Finally, Eli broke. "I want to leave. I'm 15. I could get work in town, send money back. But Thomas thinks that's betraying the family." "Because it is," Thomas said. "We need everyone here." "For what? To watch everything fall apart slower?" Eli's voice cracked. "I'm tired, Thomas. I'm tired of working myself to death for nothing. I'm tired of being hungry. I'm tired of pretending this is ever going to get better. So you just abandon us. I'm trying to help." "By leaving." Eli turned to Harlan. Tell him it's okay for me to go." But Harlan just stood there, soaked and silent, looking like a man who'd run out of answers years ago. Nora stepped between them. "You both want the same thing. You just disagree on how to get it." "We want opposite things," Thomas said. "No. You both want this ranch to survive. You want your family to survive. Eli thinks leaving will help. Thomas thinks staying is the only option." She looked at each of them. "But what if you're both wrong?" "What's that supposed to mean?" Eli asked. "It means maybe the problem isn't the fence or the cattle or who stays and who goes. Maybe the problem is that you're all trying to survive alone when you should be asking for help." Thomas laughed bitterly. "From who? The town that's already given up on us? The ranchers who cross the street when they see Pa coming?" "From each other for a start. Nora turned to Harlan. When's the last time you all sat down and actually talked about what's happening here? Harlan's jaw tightened. We work. That's what we do. And how's that working out? The silence that followed was answer enough. Tonight, Nora said. After supper. Everyone sits down and we figure this out together. No more fighting, no more assumptions about what other people are thinking. We talk like a family instead of strangers living in the same house. We don't need a family meeting, Harlan said. Yes, you do. You needed one months ago. Nora's voice stayed calm but firm. But tonight's when you're getting one. All of you. She walked back to the house, leaving them standing in the yard dripping and stunned. Rue tugged on Thomas's wet sleeve. Is she always like this? Thomas stared after Nora. I have no idea. The rest of the day passed in tense quiet. Nora finished the laundry, started mending the massive pile of torn clothes, cleaned the kitchen again after lunch. The boys worked outside, their voices careful, their movements cautious around each other. Harlan came in once, mid-afternoon, looking for coffee. Nora poured him a cup without speaking. He stood by the window, drinking slowly, watching his sons work in the distance. You can't fix this, he said finally. Probably not. Nora didn't look up from her mending. But I can make it harder for you all to keep pretending it's not broken. Things were simpler before you got here. Things were falling apart before I got here. There's a difference. Harlan finished his coffee and set down the cup. That meeting tonight, it's a mistake. Maybe, but you're going to do it anyway. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect, not quite resentment, something in between. You're stubborn, he said. I learned from experts. Nora threaded her needle. Now go back to work before your sons think you're avoiding them. He almost smiled. Almost. After he left, Cade slipped in through the back door. He'd been absent most of the day, which apparently was normal for him. He grabbed bread from the kitchen and started to leave. Where do you go? Nora asked. Cade froze. What? During the day. Where do you go when you disappear? Around? That's not an answer. He turned to face her, defensive. Why do you care? Because you live here, because you're 12 years old and shouldn't be vanishing for hours without anyone knowing where you are. I'm fine. That's not what I asked. Cade's eyes narrowed. You've been here 2 days. You don't get to interrogate me. You're right. I've been here 2 days, which means I don't know all the rules yet about what I can and can't ask. So I'm asking anyway. Nora set down her mending. Where do you go, Cade? For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he slumped against the doorframe. Town, he admitted. I trade stuff for money. What kind of stuff? Whatever I can find. Tools Pa doesn't use anymore. Scrap metal. Sometimes eggs if the chickens are laying. Nora's chest tightened. Does your father know? No, and you can't tell him. Why not? Because he'll lose his mind. He barely holds it together as it is. Cade's voice dropped. The money I get helps. I give it to Thomas, tell him I found it. He uses it to buy supplies. If Pa knew I was selling ranch stuff, He stopped. He'd think I was stealing, betraying him. Are you? I'm trying to help. Cade's face twisted. But no one ever sees it that way. They just see someone taking things that don't belong to him. Nora studied the boy in front of her. 12 years old, trying to save his family the only way he knew how, convinced everyone would hate him if they knew the truth. Bring whatever you were planning to trade next time, she said. I'll look at it first. Make sure it's actually something that won't be missed. And we'll keep a record of what you take and what you make, so if your father ever asks, we can show him it wasn't stealing, it was smart. Cade stared at her. You're not going to tell Pa. Not unless you want me to. But Cade, this can't be a permanent solution. Eventually, you're going to run out of things to trade. I know. His voice was small. I just don't know what else to do. That's what tonight's meeting is for. To figure it out together instead of everyone running off in different directions. Cade nodded slowly, then disappeared back outside before anyone could see him talking to her. Nora returned to her mending, but her hands shook slightly. 2 days here and she'd already uncovered family secrets, stopped a fight, and forced a meeting that might explode in everyone's faces. Maybe Harlan was right. Maybe she couldn't fix this. But she'd be damned if she didn't try. Supper was quieter than the night before. Everyone could feel the meeting coming like a storm on the horizon. Nora had made stew from the last of the vegetables and some questionable meat she'd found in the smokehouse. It wasn't her best work, but it was hot and filling. The boys ate quickly, like they wanted to get it over with. Harlan ate slowly, like he was delaying the inevitable. When the dishes were cleared, no one moved to leave. They all just sat there, waiting for someone else to start. Nora poured coffee for the adults, water for the younger boys. Then she sat down at the opposite end of the table from Harlan. "All right," she said. "Who wants to go first?" Silence. "No one? Fine. I'll start." Nora looked around the table. "This family is falling apart. You all know it. You're exhausted, you're scared, you're angry at each other, and you've forgotten how to be anything except people who live in the same house and barely survive." "We're doing the best we can," Harlan said. "I know, but your best is killing you." Nora's voice stayed level. "So we're going to talk about what's actually happening instead of pretending everything's fine. And we're going to do it without yelling, without fighting, and without anyone walking away." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "What's the point? Talking doesn't fix fences or cure cattle or make money appear." "No, but it stops you from tearing each other apart while you're trying to do those things." Nora turned to Eli. "You want to leave. Tell everyone why." Eli looked at his father, then at Thomas, then down at his hands. "Because I'm 15, and I'm tired of watching everything I work for amount to nothing. I want to help, but staying here feels like just waiting to die." Harlan flinched. "You think leaving makes you a coward," Nora said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, but staying when you can't see a future here doesn't make you brave. It makes you trapped." She looked at Thomas. "And you think if Eli leaves, he's abandoning all of you?" Thomas nodded. "But what if he's right? What if him leaving and sending money back actually helps more than him staying and working himself to death?" "It's not the same as being here," Thomas insisted. "No, it's not. But different doesn't mean wrong." She turned to Cade. "You've been trading ranch supplies for money, trying to help without anyone knowing." Every head snapped toward Cade. "You what?" Harlan's voice went dangerous. "I told you not to tell," Cade hissed at Nora. "I said I wouldn't tell unless you wanted me to. This is me giving you the choice to explain yourself before assumptions get made." Cade's face flushed red, but he spoke anyway. "I took stuff we weren't using, traded it in town, gave the money to Thomas to buy supplies. I wasn't stealing, I was helping." "Without asking permission," Harlan said. "You wouldn't have given it." "Because it's not yours to take." "None of this is mine. None of this is any of ours. It's all falling apart, and you won't admit it." Cade's voice rose. "So yeah, I traded some stuff. And yeah, I didn't ask. But at least I was doing something instead of just working myself to death pretending it matters." Harlan stood up. "You think I don't know we're failing? You think I don't see it every single day? I'm doing everything I can. But it's not enough," Eli said quietly. "That's the problem, Pa. Everything we do isn't enough because we're doing it alone. We don't have a choice." "Yes, we do," Nora said. "That's what I've been trying to tell you. You have choices. They're not easy choices. They're not perfect choices. But pretending you don't have options is just another way of giving up." Harlan turned to her, and for a moment she thought he might order her out of the house. But he just stood there, this man who'd carried too much for too long, looking like he'd finally run out of strength to hold it all. "What would you have me do?" he asked, and his voice cracked on the question. "Ask for help," Nora said simply. "From who? Other ranchers? The town. Anyone who'll listen." She stood up. "You're not the only family struggling. You're just the only one too proud to admit it out loud. But if you told the truth, if you stood up and said you need help, I bet you'd be surprised how many people are in the same position." "They'll think I'm weak. They already think you're failing. At least this way you'd be failing honestly." Thomas spoke up then. "What if they don't help? What if we ask and they say no?" "Then we're no worse off than we are now," Nora said. "But if they say yes, if even one person says yes, we've got more than we had before." The room went quiet again. But this time it felt different. Not hostile, not resigned, just thoughtful. Rue, who'd been silent the whole time, spoke up in his small voice. "I don't want Eli to leave." Eli looked at his youngest brother. "I know, buddy. But if it helps, Maybe it's okay. Rue's eyes filled with tears. I just don't want anyone else to die. The words landed like a punch. Harlan sat back down heavily. Thomas's jaw clenched. Even Cade looked away. Nora reached over and squeezed Rue's small hand. No one's dying. We're figuring out how to live. There's a difference. They talked for another hour. Not about solutions. Those would take time. But about truth. About fear. About the fact that staying silent was killing them faster than any drought or disease ever could. By the time everyone stumbled off to bed, nothing was fixed. But something had shifted. The next morning, Harlan did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He rode into town. Not to buy supplies or avoid his family or drink away problems at the saloon. He went to talk to other ranchers. Nora watched him go from the porch, Rue beside her. Think it'll work? The little boy asked. I don't know, Nora admitted, but at least he's trying. 3 days later, rancher Willis Mercer showed up at the Greer Ranch with 2 of his sons and lumber for fence repairs. Heard you could use a hand, he said gruffly to Harlan. Harlan looked like he'd been hit. I didn't ask for charity. Good. I'm not offering any. You help me with my harvest next month. We're even. It was a small thing, one neighbor helping another. But it was the first crack in the wall of isolation that had surrounded the Greer family for years. That night, after the fence was repaired and Mercer had gone home, Harlan found Nora in the kitchen. You were right, he said. About what? Asking for help. I should have done it sooner. Nora didn't say anything. She just kept washing dishes. Harlan moved closer. The marriage is legal now. Reverend came by yesterday while you were busy with the boys. Papers are filed. All right. That make you my wife officially, not just in name. Nora turned to look at him. What exactly are you asking, Harlan? He rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable. Just that things are different now. With you here. Better, different. And I wanted you to know that. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even particularly romantic. But coming from this man who'd spent years barely speaking, it was something. Thank you, Nora said. Harlan nodded and left her to finish the dishes. Alone in the kitchen, Nora allowed herself a small smile. The ranch was still falling apart. The boys were still damaged. The winter would still be brutal. But for the first time since she'd arrived, Nora felt like maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Not at perfection, not at easy living, just at survival that didn't feel like slow death. And sometimes that was enough. The change didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, small and grudging, like spring thawing frozen ground. Willis Mercer's visit opened a door that had been locked for years. Within a week, 2 more ranchers stopped by. Not offering help exactly, but not refusing it either. They talked about shared problems, sick cattle, broken equipment, the impossibility of doing everything alone. Conversations that might have seemed like complaining anywhere else felt like confession out here, admitting weakness in a place where weakness got you killed. Harlan participated in these talks with visible discomfort, his jaw tight, his answers short. But he participated. That was something. Nora watched it all from the periphery, cooking for unexpected visitors, mending in the corner while men discussed things they thought women shouldn't hear. She learned more from their silences than their words, the way they avoided mentioning certain ranchers, the tension when someone brought up Black Hollow Pass, the fact that everyone knew the outlaws were getting bolder, but no one wanted to be the first to say it out loud. She also learned that the town had its own hierarchy, its own rules about who mattered and who didn't. The Greers were firmly in the didn't category, had been ever since Harlan's wife died, and the ranch started its slow collapse. People in Sorrow Creek had long memories and short patience for failure. They're waiting for us to quit, Thomas said one evening after another rancher had left. He was fixing a bridle that had broken for the 3rd time, his hands working the leather with frustrated efficiency. Half the town's probably got bets going on when we'll pack up and leave. Then they'll be disappointed, Nora said. She was working on a shirt that belonged to Porter, replacing buttons that had been missing so long the boy had forgotten what it looked like whole. You sound pretty confident for someone who's been here less than a month. I'm confident you're all too stubborn to quit. There's a difference between confidence and delusion. Thomas almost smiled. You're saying we're stubborn? I'm saying you're Greers. Stubborn comes with the name. Nora bit off thread. Besides, quitting is what they expect. Why give them the satisfaction? Because sometimes quitting is smarter than fighting a losing battle. And sometimes fighting a losing battle is the only way to find out it wasn't as lost as you thought. Thomas looked at her properly then, something shifting in his expression. You really believe that? I wouldn't be here if I didn't. He went back to the bridle, but his shoulders had relaxed slightly. After a moment he spoke again, quieter this time. Ma used to say things like that, about not giving up even when things looked impossible. It was the first time he'd mentioned his mother directly to Nora. She kept her hand steady on her sewing, giving him space to continue or retreat. She was wrong, though, Thomas continued, because she gave up in the end. She died. That's not the same as giving up. Feels the same from where I'm sitting. His voice went hard. One day she was here telling us everything would be fine. Next day she was burning up with fever. 3 days after that she was gone, and Pa just... He stopped, jaw clenched. Just what? Stopped. Stopped talking to us like we were his kids instead of workers. Stopped caring about anything except keeping the ranch going another day. Stopped being our father. Nora set down her sewing. He was grieving. For 2 years? Thomas looked up and his eyes were angry. At some point it stops being grief and starts being abandonment. He's been here, but he hasn't been here. You know what I mean? She did know. She'd seen it the first night, Harlan going through motions, surviving instead of living, so buried in his own pain he couldn't see his sons drowning in theirs. People grieve differently, Nora said carefully. Some people cry it out. Some people work it out. Some people bury it so deep they forget it's there until something forces them to remember. What kind are you? The question caught her off guard. What? When your first husband died. How'd you grieve? Nora's hand stilled on the fabric. No one had asked her that. Not the reverend who'd arranged this marriage. Not Harlan. Not anyone. I worked, she said finally. 16 hours a day at the dress shop, then took in mending at night. Barely slept. Barely ate. Kept moving because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant falling apart. Did it help? No, but it kept me alive until I could figure out how to actually live again. She met Thomas's eyes. Your father's doing the same thing. It's not right, and it's not fair to you boys, but it's how he's surviving. The question is whether he'll ever stop surviving long enough to live. Thomas considered this, then went back to the bridle. But something in the set of his shoulders suggested he'd heard her. The next morning brought the first real cold snap. Frost covered everything, turning the ranch into something that looked almost beautiful if you ignored the fact that beauty out here usually meant death for something. Livestock, crops, people who weren't prepared. Harlan took Thomas and Eli to move the cattle to winter pasture. Cade and Porter were supposed to reinforce the chicken coop, but Cade had disappeared again, off trading supplies Nora had approved, though she was starting to wonder if the money he brought back was worth the risk he took getting it. That left Nora with Reeve and Rue. Reeve had barely spoken to her in the 3 weeks she'd been here. He watched her constantly with those dark, unreadable eyes, but whenever she tried to engage him in conversation, he'd slip away like smoke. Rue, on the other hand, had attached himself to her with the desperation of someone who'd been starving for attention and finally found a source. Can I help you bake? He asked for the 10th time that morning. If you promise not to eat all the dough before it becomes bread. I promise. He climbed onto his stool, ready and eager. What do I do? Nora set him to measuring flour, watching carefully to make sure he didn't spill too much. They couldn't afford waste. Every ingredient mattered when supplies were this tight. Reeve drifted into the kitchen, hovering near the doorway. You can help too, Nora offered. He shook his head. You can watch then. That's fine. Reeve stayed where he was, silent and still. They worked for a while in quiet broken only by Rue's constant questions. Why does bread need to rise? How does yeast work? Why does it smell like that? Nora answered each question patiently, remembering when she'd been young and curious and someone had taken the time to explain things instead of just telling her to be quiet. Your ma used to bake? Rue asked suddenly. Nora's hands paused in the dough. Sometimes, when we had enough flour. Why? Just wondering. Rue concentrated very hard on measuring salt. Our ma used to bake every Saturday. The whole house would smell good. From the doorway, Reeve went very still. That sounds nice, Nora said carefully. It was. Rue's small face scrunched up. I don't remember her face anymore. Just the smell of bread. Is that bad? The question hit Nora square in the chest. She set down the dough and crouched so she was eye level with the boy. No, honey, that's not bad. That's just how memory works sometimes. We hold on to what we can. Thomas says I should try harder to remember, that forgetting means she didn't matter. Thomas is wrong. Nora kept her voice gentle but firm. You were 2 years old when she died. You remember what a 2-year-old can remember. That doesn't mean she didn't matter. It means you were a baby. Rue's eyes welled up. I miss her anyway, even though I don't remember her right. I know. Do you miss your first husband? Sometimes. Mostly I miss who I was before he died. Does that make sense? Rue nodded, though Nora wasn't sure he fully understood. That was all right. Some things you couldn't understand until you lived them. Reeve turned and walked away without a word. Nora almost followed, then stopped herself. That boy needed space more than he needed conversation. She'd learned that much at least. The bread was rising when Cade came back, his pockets jingling with coins. He looked pleased with himself until he saw Nora's expression. What? He asked defensively. How much did you get? $2. That's good, right? For what did you trade? Cade hesitated. Old tools, stuff from the shed Pa never uses. Show me what you took. I already traded it. Then tell me exactly what it was. Cade's face flushed. Why does it matter? I got money. That's what counts. It matters because if you traded something your father needs and we have to buy it back later, we're worse off than before. That's not helping. That's making problems. I'm trying to help, Cade said, his voice rising. Everyone else just sits around talking about what we should do, but I actually do something. And I appreciate that. But helping without thinking isn't helping. It's just action for action's sake. Better than doing nothing. Not if the action makes things worse. Cade threw the coins on the table. Fine. You deal with it then. I'm done trying. He stormed out before Nora could respond. Rue watched him go with worried eyes. Cade's always angry now. He's scared, Nora said. Anger's easier than admitting you're scared. Are you scared? Nora looked at this 4-year-old who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who tried to cook supper on a stool because no one else had time, who couldn't remember his mother's face but remembered the smell of her baking. Yes, she said honestly, I'm scared all the time. But I do things anyway because being scared and being stopped aren't the same thing. Rue absorbed this with the seriousness of someone much older. Then he went back to measuring ingredients, and Nora went back to kneading dough, and they both pretended the conversation hadn't revealed more than either of them meant to share. That afternoon, a woman showed up at the ranch. She arrived in a wagon that had seen better decades, pulled by a horse that looked like it was held together by spite and habit. She was maybe 50, maybe 70. Hard living made age impossible to judge out here. Her dress was clean but patched. Her face was lined with sun and smoke. Her eyes were sharp enough to cut. You the new Mrs. Greer? She asked Nora without preamble. I am. Name's Charlotte Webb. My husband's got the ranch north of here. She climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility. Heard you're the one got these men talking to each other again. I just suggested they try honesty instead of silence. Charlotte snorted. Same thing out here. Most of these fools would rather die quiet than admit they need help. She pulled a basket from the wagon. Brought you preserves. Figured you could use them. Nora took the basket, surprised. That's kind of you. Ain't kind. It's practical. Your family starves. Mine's one step closer to being next. We look out for each other, or we all go down. Charlotte's eyes swept over the ranch, taking in every broken fence and sagging building. Place is worse than I heard. We're working on it. I bet you are. Charlotte turned her sharp gaze on Nora. Question is whether you'll get it done before winter really hits. Cold's coming early this year. I can feel it in my bones. We'll manage. That what you tell yourself, or what you tell them? Charlotte jerked her head toward the house where Rue had appeared in the window, watching. Both. Charlotte studied Nora for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You might make it after all. Most mail-order brides don't last a month once they see what frontier life really looks like. But you got something different about you. Stubbornness, maybe, or stupidity. Hard to tell which. Probably both. That earned her an actual smile from Charlotte. I like you. That's rare. She started back toward her wagon. Women in town meet once a month at the general store. First Saturday? You should come. I don't know if I'd be welcome. You won't be. Half those hens will talk behind your back about how desperate you must have been to marry Harlan Greer. Other half will just stare like you're a curiosity in a traveling show. Charlotte hauled herself back up. Come anyway. Let them talk. While they're busy gossiping about you, you can figure out which ones are worth knowing and which ones are just taking up space. She drove off before Nora could respond, leaving behind a basket of preserves and the first genuine offer of friendship Nora had received since arriving in Sorrow Creek. That night at supper, Nora mentioned Charlotte's visit. Harlan grunted. Webb's place is struggling same as ours. She's probably just scouting to see if we're worse off, so she can feel better about her own situation. Maybe, Nora said. Or maybe she's looking for allies. Allies for what? For surviving. For helping each other instead of competing to see who collapses last. Thomas spoke up. The Webbs have 3 sons, all older than me. If we partnered with them for some of the bigger jobs, we don't need partnership, Harlan interrupted. We need to handle our own business. Pa, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's got us in this mess. Watch your mouth. Why? It's true. Thomas set down his fork. We've been trying to handle our own business for 2 years. Look where it's got us. Maybe it's time to admit we can't do everything alone. Harlan's face went dark. You saying I can't provide for this family? I'm saying you're one man trying to do the work of 5 while 5 sons try to do the work of 10. The math doesn't work, Pa. It never has. The table went silent. Even Cade stopped eating to watch. Harlan stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. I've kept this ranch going through drought, through sickness, through your mother dying and leaving me with 6 boys to raise alone. Don't tell me about math. Keeping it going isn't the same as making it work, Thomas said quietly. We're surviving, barely. But surviving isn't living, and you know it. Then what would you have me do? Ask for help. Accept it when it's offered. Stop acting like needing other people makes you weak. Harlan looked at his oldest son with an expression Nora couldn't quite read. Anger, yes, but also something else, something that looked almost like recognition. You sound like your mother, he said finally. Good. Thomas's voice didn't waver. Someone should. Harlan turned and walked out, leaving his supper half-eaten on the table. The boys looked at each other uncertainly. Nora started clearing dishes, trying to give them space to process whatever had just happened. I shouldn't have pushed him, Thomas said. Yes, you should have, Nora replied. Someone needed to. He's going to be impossible now. He was impossible before. At least now he's thinking about it. Eli spoke up. You think he'll actually change? Or is this just going to make everything worse? Nora paused, a stack of plates in her hands. I think change is hard and painful, and people resist it even when they know it's necessary. But I also think your father is smart enough to see the difference between pride and survival. Eventually. Eventually might be too late, Cade muttered. Then we make sure it's not. Nora continued clearing. Finish eating, all of you, and someone check on your father in an hour. Make sure he hasn't done something stupid. Like what? Porter asked. Like deciding to prove he can fix everything himself by working through the night and collapsing from exhaustion. Nora had seen it before. Men so determined to prove their strength they'd work themselves to death rather than admit weakness. Thomas nodded. I'll check on him. After the boys dispersed, Nora finished the dishes in quiet. Through the window, she could see Harlan in the distance, a dark figure against darkening sky. He was checking fence line that didn't need checking, burning off anger the only way he knew how. She understood that impulse. The need to move when sitting still meant feeling too much. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Nora sat in the kitchen with the preserve Charlotte had brought. She opened one jar, strawberry by the smell, and tasted it. Sweet and tart, and better than anything she'd had in months. She'd saved most of it for the boys. But tonight, just for a moment, she let herself have something good. The door creaked. Harlan stood in the doorway, looking exhausted. Can't sleep? Nora asked. Never could. Not since... He stopped. Not for a long time. Sit. I'll make coffee. Don't need coffee. Sit anyway. He sat. Nora poured coffee he claimed not to need and pushed it across the table. For a while, neither of them spoke. Thomas is right, Harlan said finally. About all of it. I've been trying to handle everything alone and it's not working. Hasn't been working for a long time. I know. You also right. About asking for help. About accepting it. He wrapped his hands around the cup. But it's hard. Admitting I can't do this by myself feels like admitting I failed them. Failed her. Your wife? She asked me once, when she was dying, to make sure the boys were taken care of. Not just fed and clothed, actually taken care of, and I promised her I would. His voice cracked. But I haven't. I've kept them alive, but that's not the same thing. They're angry and hurt and barely holding together, and that's my fault. Nora reached across the table and gripped his hand. Then fix it. How? The same way you fix everything else. One piece at a time, one day at a time. Stop trying to solve everything at once and just do the next right thing. Harlan looked at their joined hands like he'd forgotten what human comfort felt like. What's the next right thing? Talk to Thomas. Really talk to him. Tell him what you just told me. He won't want to hear it. He's desperate to hear it. He's been waiting 2 years to hear it. Nora squeezed his hand once more, then let go. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you're trying. Tell him you need his help. Those 3 things will matter more than any fence you fix or cattle you save. Harlan nodded slowly. And after that? After that, you keep trying. Every day. Until trying becomes living again instead of just surviving. He finished his coffee in silence, then stood. At the door he paused. Nora? Yes? I'm glad you're here. Even if everything else is falling apart, I'm glad you're here. He left before she could respond. Nora sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around her. Upstairs, floorboards creaked as someone shifted in sleep. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. In the distance, a coyote called and another answered. 3 weeks ago, she'd arrived at this ranch expecting hardship. What she'd found was harder than hardship. It was a family so broken they'd forgotten what whole looked like. Boys who'd lost their mother and then lost their father to grief. A man drowning in responsibility and pride and inability to ask for what he needed. She couldn't fix all of it, maybe couldn't fix any of it, but she could stay, she could try. She could keep pushing them toward honesty and connection even when they resisted. That would have to be enough. Nora finished Charlotte's preserves, cleaned the jar, and went upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring new problems. More work than hours to do it. More evidence of everything falling apart. But it would also bring another chance to build something from the wreckage. And for now, that possibility was enough to sleep on. The first real snow came in November, 3 weeks earlier than anyone expected. Nora woke to silence, the kind that happens when the world gets buried under something it can't fight. She dressed quickly in the cold room, her breath visible, her fingers clumsy with buttons. Downstairs, she found Harlan already awake, staring out the window at a landscape transformed into something white and unforgiving. How bad? She asked. Bad enough. His voice was flat. Breckett Road's going to be impassable. Won't see supply wagons for weeks, maybe longer. We have enough? If we're careful. If nothing else goes wrong. He pulled on his coat. That's a lot of ifs. Thomas appeared on the stairs, already dressed for outside work. I'll get the livestock closer to the barn. Eli can reinforce the chicken coop before the weight of the snow collapses it. I'll help, Harlan said. They left without breakfast, driven by the urgency of weather that didn't wait for preparation. Nora started coffee and began taking inventory. Flour, enough for maybe 2 weeks if she stretched it. Cornmeal, less than that. Dried beans, salt pork, the preserves Charlotte had brought. Some root vegetables in the cellar, though half were already rotting. It wasn't enough for 8 people to make it through winter, not even close. The younger boys came down one by one, drawn by the smell of coffee and the reality of snow. Are we snowed in? Rue asked, his small face pressed against the window. Looks like it, Nora said. For how long? Until it melts or until the road clears enough for wagons. Could be days. Could be weeks. Porter sat at the table, unusually quiet. Reeve hovered near the door like he might bolt outside despite the storm. Cade came down last, already dressed and looking restless. We should have stocked up more, Cade said. echoing what everyone was thinking. Should have doesn't help us now, Nora replied. We work with what we have. What we have isn't enough. Then we make it enough. Cade laughed bitterly. You can't just decide there's enough food when there isn't. That's not how it works. No, but you can decide to be smart about what you've got instead of panicking about what you don't. Nora started rationing portions in her head, calculating how to make supplies stretch. We'll manage. You keep saying that like saying it makes it true. Saying it doesn't make it true. Working toward it does. She looked at Cade directly. So either help or get out of the way, but stop wasting energy on complaining. Cade's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just grabbed his coat and went outside, slamming the door behind him. Rue climbed onto his stool. Is Cade right? Do we not have enough food? Nora wanted to lie. Wanted to tell him everything would be fine, that they had plenty, that he shouldn't worry. But Rue had already learned that adults lied when things got bad, and she wouldn't be another person who taught him not to trust what he was told. We have enough if we're careful, she said. That means smaller portions. That means nothing wasted. That means some days we'll be hungry, but we'll make it. What if we don't? Then we figure out something else. But we're not at something else yet. We're still at being careful. Rue nodded solemnly and went back to watching the snow fall. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that howled through gaps in the walls. 3 days of snow that piled so high the younger boys could barely see over it. 3 days trapped inside with too many people, too little space, and the kind of tension that builds when everyone's scared but no one wants to admit it. On the second day, 2 more cattle died from the sickness that had been spreading. Harlan and Thomas dragged the carcasses away from the herd, their faces grim. They couldn't afford to lose more livestock, but there was nothing to do except watch and hope the disease burned itself out before it killed everything. On the third day, the food situation became undeniable. Nora had been stretching meals as far as they'd go, watering down soup, making bread from less and less flour, rationing everything down to the last crumb. But there was only so much stretching possible before it became obvious they were going hungry. The boys stopped complaining about portion sizes. That was the worst part. They just accepted the smaller meals without comment, their eyes hollow, their movements slower. Harlan ate less than anyone, giving his portions to the younger boys when he thought no one was watching. Nora caught him doing it on the third night. Stop, she said quietly. They need it more. They need you alive more than they need an extra spoonful of beans. She pushed his bowl back toward him. Eat. I'm fine. You're not fine. None of us are fine. But you starving yourself doesn't help anyone. Harlan stared at the bowl. There's not enough. I know, but dying won't create more food. It'll just leave 6 boys and a woman trying to survive winter alone. So eat. He picked up his spoon. On the 4th day, the snow finally stopped. The world outside was transformed, beautiful and deadly. Drifts had piled against the house so high they blocked the lower windows. The path to the barn had disappeared entirely. Everything was white and silent and hostile. Thomas and Eli started digging immediately, creating paths to the essential buildings. The work was brutal. Hours of shoveling snow that weighed more than it looked, backs screaming, hands blistered even through gloves. Harlan worked alongside them, saying nothing, just digging with the grim determination of someone who knew stopping meant freezing. Nora kept the fire going and tried to make their dwindling supplies last another day. That afternoon, Charlotte Webb appeared. She came on horseback, a feat that seemed impossible given the snow depth, leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. She looked half frozen, but triumphant. Figured you'd be running low, she called out as she dismounted. Brought what I could spare? Harlan met her in the yard. We can't pay you. Did I ask for payment? Charlotte started unloading. Flour, cornmeal, dried meat, potatoes. Not a fortune, but enough to buy them another few weeks. Consider it a loan. You help me come spring. We're even. Charlotte, don't. She cut him off. I know what pride sounds like, Harlan, and I'm too cold to listen to it. Take the supplies. Feed your family. Thank me later by not being stupid enough to starve when help's available. She wouldn't stay for coffee, despite Nora's insistence. Just delivered the supplies and rode back out into the snow before anyone could properly thank her. That night, the family ate their first full meal in days. No one spoke about how close they'd come to real hunger. No one acknowledged how much worse it could have gotten. They just ate and the relief in the room was thick enough to taste. After supper, Harlan found Charlotte's supplies still stacked in the kitchen and stood there for a long moment, his hand on a sack of flour. "I should have asked for help sooner," he said to Nora. "Yes?" "Should have swallowed my pride weeks ago." "Yes." "You're not going to make this easier, are you?" "Would you want me to?" Nora was mending again, always mending. The pile never seemed to shrink. "You need to hear it. Your pride almost killed your family." Harlan flinched but didn't argue. "What do I do now?" "You learn. You remember. You don't make the same mistake twice." She bit off thread. "And you find a way to pay Charlotte back that matters, because people like her don't come around often." She said we could help her in spring. "Then you make sure you're in a position to help come spring. That means keeping this ranch alive through winter. That means accepting help when it's offered. That means teaching your boys that asking for help isn't weakness, it's survival." Harlan sat down heavily. "I don't know if I can do that." "Then learn, same as the rest of us." He looked at her with something between frustration and respect. "You don't pull punches, do you?" "Would you prefer I did?" "No." He stood, grabbed his coat. "I'm going to check the livestock one more time before bed." "Harlan." He paused at the door. "Thank you," Nora said. "For listening, for trying, for not giving up even when it would be easier." He nodded and disappeared into the cold. The next week brought more snow, but less of it. Enough to keep them isolated, not enough to bury them. The days fell into a rhythm dictated by survival. Wake before dawn, work until dark, fall into bed exhausted. Repeat. Thomas spent hours each day breaking ice on water troughs. Eli kept the animals fed with dwindling hay supplies. Kate and Porter handled firewood, a never-ending job in cold this brutal. Reeve helped where he could, still silent, still watching everything with those dark eyes. And Rue stayed close to Nora, helping in the kitchen, asking endless questions, soaking up attention like someone who'd been starving for it. "Tell me about St. Louis," he said one afternoon while they were baking bread. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. What it looked like, what people did there, why you left." Nora measured flour carefully. Their supplies were better now, but still needed rationing. "It was big. More people than you've probably ever seen in one place. Buildings so tall they blocked out the sun on some streets." "Did you like it?" "Sometimes. It had its good parts and its bad parts, like anywhere else." "What were the good parts?" Nora thought about it. "There was a park near where I worked. In spring, the trees would bloom all at once, and the whole place would smell like flowers. I used to eat lunch there when I could afford to take a break." "What were the bad parts?" "The bad parts were why I left." She didn't elaborate, and Rue was smart enough not to push. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Rue spoke again, quieter this time. "Do you miss your old life?" "Parts of it, not most of it." "Do you like it here?" Nora looked at this small boy who'd asked the question like he was afraid of the answer. "Yes." "Really?" "Really. It's hard and it's cold, and half the time I don't know if we're going to make it through the week. But yes, I like it here." "Why?" "Because I matter here. Back in St. Louis, I was just one more person in a city full of people. Here, what I do makes a difference. You boys would eat worse without me. The house would be dirtier. Your father would be lonelier. That matters." Rue considered this seriously. "You matter to me." Nora's hand stilled on the dough. "Thank you, honey. You matter to me, too." "More than your old life?" "Much more." Rue smiled. A real smile. Not the careful half-smiles he usually gave. Then he went back to measuring ingredients, and Nora went back to kneading, and neither of them mentioned how much that small exchange had meant. That night, everything changed. It started with a sound. Horses approaching fast through snow that should have made fast travel impossible. Then voices, men's voices, rough and unfamiliar. Then pounding on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. Harlan grabbed his rifle. Thomas did the same. The younger boys scattered upstairs without being told. "Stay back," Harlan ordered Nora. She ignored him and moved to where she could see the door but wouldn't be in the direct line of fire if shooting started. Harlan opened the door carefully, rifle ready. 3 men stood on the porch. They were bundled against the cold, but their faces were visible enough, hard faces. the kind that came from hard living and harder choices. The one in front was older, maybe 50, with a scar running from his eye to his jaw. The two behind him were younger, their hands resting casually near their gun belts. "Help you?" Harlan asked, his voice neutral, but his stance anything but. "Looking for shelter," the scarred man said. "Storm caught us on the road. Saw your light." "Storm's been over for days. Another one's coming. You can feel it." The man's eyes moved past Harlan, taking in the house, the family, everything worth knowing. "We'd pay for a night's lodging, just somewhere warm to sleep." "We don't take in strangers." "Everyone's a stranger until they're not." The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Come on, friend. It's cold out here. Show some frontier hospitality." "I'm not your friend." Harlan's grip on the rifle tightened. "And my hospitality doesn't extend to armed men showing up after dark." The atmosphere shifted. The two younger men moved their hands closer to their weapons. The scarred man's smile disappeared. "That's a hard answer to a simple request." "It's the only answer you're getting." For a moment, Nora thought it would turn violent right there. The men looked ready for it. Harlan looked ready for it. Then Thomas appeared beside his father, rifle in hand. Then Eli. Two boys barely grown but armed and willing. The scarred man reassessed the situation. 3 armed men against 3 armed defenders in a house that probably held more people. Not impossible odds, but not easy ones either. "Your choice," he said finally. "But you should know there's trouble coming to this valley. Might want to reconsider who you make enemies of." "I'll take my chances." The man nodded slowly. "We'll remember this." They left, disappearing into the darkness and snow. Harlan closed the door and locked it. His hands were shaking slightly. "Who were they?" Thomas asked. "Black Hollow Gang." Harlan's voice was grim. "Or scouts for them. Either way, nothing good." "They'll come back," Eli said. It wasn't a question. "Probably." Nora stepped forward. "What's Black Hollow?" Harlan set down his rifle. "Outlaws. They've been working this territory for years, usually stick to isolated ranches, places that can't fight back. Steal cattle, supplies, whatever they want. Sometimes worse." "How much worse?" "Last year they burned out a family 30 miles north. Killed the husband when he tried to resist. Wife and kids barely got out alive." Harlan's jaw clenched. "That's Black Hollow. And they just scouted this ranch." "Yeah." Nora's mind raced. "We need to tell other ranchers, organize some kind of defense. Against Black Hollow." Harlan shook his head. "They've got numbers and experience. We're just farmers trying to survive winter. Then we make ourselves harder to attack. No." Harlan's voice went hard. "I won't put this family in more danger by antagonizing criminals. We keep our heads down, hope they move on to easier targets. And if they don't move on, if they come back, then we deal with it when it happens. That's not a plan. That's hoping. It's all we've got." Nora wanted to argue, but the fear in Harlan's eyes stopped her. He wasn't being cowardly. He was being practical, calculating odds, trying to protect his sons the only way he knew how. But practical wasn't going to save them if Black Hollow decided this ranch was worth taking. The boys were sent to bed, though Nora doubted any of them would sleep. She could hear them whispering upstairs, probably planning what they'd do if the outlaws came back. Harlan sat at the kitchen table, cleaning his rifle even though it was already clean. Thomas paced. Eli watched the windows like he expected an attack any second. "We should at least warn the other ranches," Thomas said. "And tell them what? That Black Hollow's scouting? They already know that. Everyone knows." Harlan didn't look up from the rifle. "Knowing doesn't help if you can't do anything about it. So we just wait to be victims? We're not victims yet. But we will be if we do nothing." "What would you have me do?" Harlan's voice rose. "Ride out and challenge a gang of killers? Get myself shot and leave you boys alone? That what you want? I want you to fight instead of just accepting that bad things are going to happen. I am fighting. I'm fighting to keep you alive. Sometimes that means knowing when to back down. That's not fighting. That's surrendering before the battle even starts." They were heading toward another explosion, the kind that had been building since those men appeared. Nora stepped between them. "Stop," she said. "Both of you. This isn't helping." "Stay out of this," Harlan said. "No?" Nora's voice stayed calm but firm. You're both scared, and you're taking it out on each other. That's exactly what men like Black Hollow want. They want you divided, scared, fighting among yourselves so you can't fight them. You don't understand. I understand that 3 men showed up at your door and you sent them away. That took courage. But now you need to follow it up with action, not hope. She looked at Harlan. Thomas is right. You need to warn the other ranches. You need to organize, because isolated families are easy targets. But families working together are an army. We're not an army. Not yet, but you could be. Nora moved to the window, looking out at the darkness. Those men will talk. They'll tell Black Hollow about this place, about the boys, about me. They'll assess whether we're worth attacking, and if we're alone, the answer will be yes. But if they know we're connected to other ranches, if they know an attack here means retaliation from the whole valley, they'll choose easier targets, Thomas finished. Harlan was quiet for a long moment. You're asking me to put this family in the middle of a range war. I'm asking you to make this family part of something bigger than just survival. Nora turned from the window. You've been trying to protect them by keeping them isolated, but isolation is what makes you vulnerable. Connection is what makes you strong. And if it doesn't work, if organizing just makes Black Hollow angry and they come at us harder, then at least you'll have allies when they come. At least you won't be facing them alone. Harlan looked at his oldest son. What do you think? Thomas seemed surprised to be asked. I think she's right. I think we've been so focused on surviving alone that we forgot how to survive together. And I think if we don't do something now, we won't get another chance. Eli? I agree with Thomas. Eli's voice was steady. I'd rather fight with help than die alone. Harlan closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed in his expression. All right. Tomorrow I ride to the Webbs, then to Mercer, then to whoever else will listen. We organize. We prepare. And if Black Hollow comes, when they come, Nora corrected. When they come, Harlan agreed, we'll be ready. That night, Nora couldn't sleep. She lay in her small room at the end of the hall, listening to the house settle, thinking about what she'd set in motion. If she was wrong, if organizing the ranchers just made Black Hollow angry, she'd put everyone in danger. But if she was right, they might actually survive this. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She opened the door to find Rue standing in the hallway, clutching a blanket. Can't sleep? She asked. He shook his head. Me neither. Come on. She led him downstairs to the kitchen, wrapped him in her shawl, and heated milk the way her mother used to when Nora was small and frightened. Are bad men coming? Rue asked. Nora wouldn't lie. Maybe. Are they going to hurt us? Not if we can help it. What if we can't help it? Nora handed him the warm milk. Then we fight anyway, because fighting means you're not giving up. And as long as you don't give up, there's a chance. A chance for what? For everything. For survival. For better days. For waking up tomorrow and trying again. She sat across from him. That's all any of us get, really. Chances to try. What matters is whether we take them. Rue drank his milk slowly. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad I'm here too. Even with the bad men coming? Even with that. Nora smiled. Because you're here, and your brothers are here, and your father's here, and that makes it worth fighting for. Rue finished his milk and let Nora walk him back upstairs. At his door, he hugged her, quick and fierce, then disappeared into his room before she could respond. Nora stood in the hallway, this small gesture settling something in her chest that had been unsettled since those men appeared. She'd married into this family by accident and necessity, but somewhere along the way, it had stopped being an arrangement and started being something real. These boys weren't just responsibilities anymore. They were hers to protect. This ranch wasn't just survival. It was home. And if Black Hollow thought they could take it without a fight, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. Nora returned to her room, and this time when she lay down, sleep came easier. Tomorrow, Harlan would ride out. Tomorrow they'd start building something bigger than one broken family trying to survive alone. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, for just a few hours, they could rest. And that would have to be enough. Harlan left at first light, riding through snow that had started falling again during the night. Nora watched him go from the kitchen window, coffee growing cold in her hands. Thomas stood beside her, his jaw set in that way that meant he was trying not to show he was worried. "He'll be fine," Nora said, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. "He's riding alone through territory where Black Hollow operates. Fine seems optimistic." "Your father's survived worse." "Has he?" Thomas turned to look at her. "Or has he just been lucky until now?" Nora didn't have an answer for that. The day crawled past with the weight of waiting. Eli worked on reinforcing the barn doors. Kate and Porter stacked firewood closer to the house in case they needed to barricade quickly. Reeve disappeared into the root cellar and emerged with every tool that could be used as a weapon. Rusty axes, broken scythes, anything with an edge. "What are you doing?" Nora asked him. Reeve laid everything out on the porch, his dark eyes meeting hers directly for the first time since she'd arrived. "Getting ready." "For what?" "For when they come back." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who'd already accepted violence as inevitable. He was 7 years old. Nora crouched beside him. "You're 7. You shouldn't have to think about things like this. Ma died when I was 5. Pa stopped being Pa when I was 6. I've been thinking about bad things for a while now." Reeve picked up a hatchet, testing its weight. "Thinking doesn't make them happen. Not thinking doesn't make them stop." "No, but you're still a child. You should be—" "Should be what? Playing? Pretending everything's fine?" Reeve's expression didn't change. "That's what babies do. I'm not a baby." He walked away before Nora could respond, carrying the hatchet like it weighed nothing. Rue appeared at her elbow. "Reeve's been like that since Ma died. He doesn't talk much, but he sees everything." "Does he scare you?" Rue thought about it. "Sometimes, but mostly he just makes me sad." "Why?" "Because he's little like me, but he doesn't act little. It's like he forgot how." Nora pulled Rue close. "Some people forget how to be children when they have to grow up too fast. It's not fair, but it happens." "Did you forget how to be a child?" "A long time ago. Different reasons, but yes." "Do you remember what it was like before you forgot?" Nora searched her memory for some fragment of childhood innocence, some moment before life got hard and staying. She found almost nothing. "Not really, just pieces, the smell of my mother's soap, the sound of my father laughing before he got sick, small things." "I'm going to try to remember," Rue said seriously, "so when I'm grown I can tell my kids what being little was like, before everything got complicated." "That's a good plan." "Will you help me remember?" Nora's chest tightened. "How?" "By not letting me forget. By reminding me when things are good, not just when they're bad." She hugged him properly then, this 4-year-old who somehow understood more about life than most adults. "I promise." Harlan returned late afternoon with Willis Mercer, Charlotte Webb, and 3 other ranchers Nora didn't know. They crowded into the house, bringing cold air and grim expressions. "Tell them what you told me," Harlan said to one of the unfamiliar men. The man was younger than Harlan, maybe 30, with burn scars covering half his face. "Black Hollow hit the Morrison place 2 nights ago. Burned the barn, stole what livestock they could move, left a message." "What kind of message?" Nora asked. The man's scarred face twisted. "They painted words on what was left of the barn. Pay or burn. Simple enough. Pay what? Whatever they decide. Protection money, they call it. You pay them regular, they leave you alone. You don't pay—" He gestured to his scars. "This was 3 years ago when I told them no. They didn't burn my whole place, but they made their point." Charlotte spoke up, her voice hard. "They've been doing this for years, picking off isolated ranches, terrorizing families until they either pay or leave. Most people pay." "Do you?" Thomas asked. "No, but I've been lucky, or too poor to be worth their time. Either way, my luck's running out same as everyone else's." Harlan spread a rough map across the table. "Here's what we know. Black Hollow operates out of the pass north of here. There's maybe 20 of them, give or take. They hit ranches in a pattern, working south through the valley, hitting families that can't defend themselves." Willis Mercer pointed to the map. "We're right in their path. Between here and the Morrison place, there's 6 ranches, including ours. If they're working south, we're next." "When?" Eli asked. "Could be days, could be weeks. But it's coming." The room went quiet. Outside, snow continued to fall, burying the world in white that looked peaceful if you didn't know better. "So what do we do?" one of the other ranchers asked. "We can't fight 20 outlaws." "Not individually," Harlan agreed, "but together. Together we're still just farmers with hunting rifles going against men who kill for a living." "Then we make ourselves not worth the trouble," Nora said. Everyone turned to look at her. "Explain," Charlotte said. Nora moved to the map. "They're counting on us being isolated, scared, easy targets. But if we consolidate, if we move families and livestock to one location and defend that, we change the equation." "You're talking about abandoning our ranches," the scarred man said. "I'm talking about temporarily relocating to save lives. Your buildings don't matter if you're dead." "Where would we consolidate?" Willis asked. Harlan answered, "Here. The Greer Ranch is central. We've got the most space, and—" he glanced at Nora. "And we've got someone who thinks different than the rest of us. Maybe that's what we need." "You're asking us to trust our lives to a woman who's been here a month," one rancher said, his tone dismissive. Charlotte's eyes flashed. "I'm asking you to trust your lives to someone who's kept this family alive through winter when everyone expected them to fail. Gender doesn't enter into it. Competence does." "It's insane." "So is facing Black Hollow alone?" Charlotte's voice cut through the room. "I'm in. Whatever Harlan and Nora are planning, I'm in." Willis nodded slowly. "My sons and I will help. We bring what livestock we can move, supplies we can carry. How long would we need to hold?" "Until Black Hollow decides we're not worth the trouble, or until winter breaks and we can get help from town," Harlan said. "That could be months. Or it could be days if they hit us hard and fast, and we're not ready." Thomas stepped forward. "I say we do it. We consolidate, we prepare, and we show them we're not going to be victims." One by one, the ranchers agreed. Not because they thought it would work, because every other option led to certain destruction. The next 3 days were chaos. Families arrived in wagons loaded with whatever they could carry. Livestock filled the pastures, cattle, horses, chickens, even a few pigs. The house became a refugee camp, people sleeping anywhere there was space. The barn overflowed. Tents were erected in the yard despite the snow. Nora organized it all with efficiency born from years of managing impossible situations. She assigned sleeping spaces, rationed supplies, coordinated cooking for 30 people with provisions meant for 8. Charlotte worked alongside her, the two women forming a partnership based on shared pragmatism and refusal to accept defeat. "You've done this before," Charlotte observed while they were sorting blankets. "Managed chaos?" "Yes. Different chaos, but the principles are the same. Most women would have run by now." "Most women didn't marry into this family." Nora counted blankets, realized they didn't have enough, started calculating who could share. "Besides, running just means dying somewhere else. At least here I can fight." "You really think we can hold against Black Hollow?" "I think we can make them bleed enough that they decide easier targets are smarter choices." Charlotte smiled grimly. "I like the way you think." The men built barricades from wagons and timber. Thomas and the Webb sons dug defensive positions around the perimeter. Even the children helped, carrying ammunition, filling water barrels, doing whatever small jobs kept them useful. Reeve worked alongside the men like he belonged there, his small hands competent with tools. No one questioned it. Out here, childhood ended when necessity demanded. On the 4th day, smoke appeared on the horizon. The Morrison place was burning again. Everyone stopped to watch the black column rising against gray sky. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The message was clear. Black Hollow was coming. That night, Harlan called everyone together. 30 people crowded into the main room, families who'd been strangers days ago, now bound by survival. Children sat wide-eyed. Women clutched rifles like they knew how to use them, and some probably did. Men checked weapons with the careful attention of people who understood they might die using them. "They're coming," Harlan said without preamble. "Probably tomorrow, maybe the day after, but soon." No one looked surprised. "We've done what we can to prepare. Barricades are up. Weapons are distributed. Everyone knows their position." He paused. "But I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be clean. People are going to get hurt. Some of us might die." A woman holding a baby started crying quietly. Her husband put his arm around her but didn't tell her to stop. If anyone wants to leave, Harlan continued, now's the time. No one will judge you. There's a difference between courage and suicide. No one moved. All right then. Harlan's voice roughened. We stand together. We fight together. And if we're lucky, if we're smart and brave and lucky, we survive together. Thomas spoke up. What if they offer terms? What if they say we can avoid bloodshed by just paying? We don't pay, Charlotte said flatly. The moment you pay extortion, you're a victim forever. They'll bleed you dry and burn you out anyway when you've got nothing left to give. But if it saves lives, it won't. The scarred man touched his burns. They took my money and still did this. Payment doesn't buy safety. It buys time until they decide to take everything else. The room absorbed this in heavy silence. Nora stepped forward. There's something else you should know. This isn't just about Black Hollow. It's about what comes after. What do you mean? Willis asked. I mean, right now, Sorrow Creek is dying. Families are isolated. Trust is gone. Everyone's barely surviving, and criminals know it. That's why Black Hollow operates here, because we're weak and divided. Nora's voice strengthened. But if we hold, if we prove that this valley can unite and fight, everything changes. We stop being victims and become something else, a community that protects its own. That's a nice dream, someone muttered. It's not a dream. It's a choice. Nora looked around the room. You've already made it by being here, by choosing to stand together instead of falling separately. Now we just have to follow through. A young woman Nora didn't know stood up. What do you need us to do? The women and children who can't fight need to be in the root cellar when it starts. It's the most protected space. Everyone else needs to be at their positions before dawn tomorrow. Nora had thought this through, mapping out scenarios while everyone else slept. They'll come at first light. That's when people are tired, when guards are least alert. We need to be ready. What about you? The woman asked. Where will you be? Nora hadn't thought about her own position. She'd been so focused on organizing everyone else. She'll be where she's needed most, Harlan said, his eyes on Nora. Same as always. That night, Nora couldn't sleep despite exhaustion. She walked through the house, stepping over sleeping families, checking on children, making sure everyone had blankets. Some people were awake, too frightened to rest. She sat with them, talking quietly about nothing important, just being present. In the kitchen, she found Thomas cleaning his rifle for the third time. You should sleep, she said. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see tomorrow. He set down the rifle. I keep thinking about Rue, about how he's 4 and he shouldn't have to hide in a cellar while men fight outside, about how if this goes wrong, he'll be an orphan. It won't go wrong. You can't know that. No, but I can choose to believe it anyway. Sometimes belief is all you've got. Thomas looked at her properly. You're not scared at all, are you? I'm terrified, Nora admitted. But being scared doesn't mean you don't act. It just means you act anyway, despite the fear. That's all courage really is. Ma used to say stuff like that. She sounds like she was smart. She was. Thomas's voice went quiet. I wish you could have met her. I think you two would have liked each other. I think so too. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Thomas spoke again. Thank you. For everything. For coming here, for not running when things got hard, for making Pa remember how to be human again, for... He stopped, composing himself. For being what we needed even when we didn't know we needed it. Nora's throat tightened. You're welcome. If something happens to me tomorrow, don't. I need to say it. Thomas met her eyes. If something happens, take care of them, the boys, Pa. Make sure they're okay. Nothing's going to happen to you. But if it does, then I'll take care of them, Nora promised. But you're going to be fine. We're all going to be fine. Thomas nodded, not quite believing but needing to pretend. Dawn came too fast and too cold. People moved to positions in near silence. The only sounds, footsteps in snow and weapons being loaded. Women and children descended into the root cellar, cramming into a space meant for vegetables, not humans. Rue clung to Nora at the entrance. I don't want to go down there, he whispered. I know, honey, but you have to. What if you don't come back? Nora crouched down, holding his small face in her hands. I will come back, I promise. Ma promised she'd get better. She didn't. The words hit like a punch. Nora had no response that wouldn't be a lie. "You're right," she said finally. "I can't promise nothing bad will happen, but I can promise I'll try my hardest to come back. That's all any of us can do." Rue hugged her fiercely, then let Charlotte guide him into the cellar. Nora took her position near the house, a rifle in her hands that she barely knew how to use. Around the perimeter, men crouched behind barricades, their breath visible in the cold morning air. Thomas was at the north position, Eli at the south. Harlan was everywhere, checking on people, offering last words of encouragement that sounded more like goodbyes. The sun rose slowly, turning snow pink, then white, then blinding. And then they came. Black Hollow appeared from the north, 20 riders moving fast through snow that should have slowed them down. They spread out as they approached, flanking the ranch on 3 sides, cutting off escape routes. The scarred man had been right. These weren't farmers or shopkeepers playing at violence. These were men who killed professionally, whose survival depended on being faster, meaner, more willing to do terrible things than their victims. They stopped just outside rifle range. The leader, the same scarred man who'd come to the door days earlier, rode forward alone, his hands visible but his posture radiating confidence. "Harlan Greer," he called out. "We need to talk." Harlan stood up from behind the barricade. "Nothing to talk about." "I think there is. You've made things complicated by gathering all these people. That's inconvenient." "Life's inconvenient. You'll survive." The outlaw leader smiled. "See? That's the question, isn't it? Who survives today?" He gestured at the gathered defenders. "You've got maybe 30 people, half of them women and children. We've got 20 men who do this for a living. You do the math. Math says you die if you attack. Some of us, sure, but all of you." The smile widened. "Those aren't good odds for you." "Then right away. Find easier targets." "Can't do that. You've made an example of yourselves by gathering like this. If we let you stand, other ranches might get ideas. Can't have that." The outlaw's voice hardened. "But I'm reasonable. Here's my offer. You pay us what the Morrison family would have paid, plus a little extra for the inconvenience. Everyone walks away alive." "How much?" "Everything you've got. Livestock, supplies, weapons. You keep your lives and the roof over your heads. That's generous, all things considered." Harlan looked at the faces behind the barricades. Families who'd brought everything they owned, trusting him to keep them safe. Giving up their supplies meant slow starvation. But fighting meant immediate death for some, maybe all of them. Before he could answer, Nora stood up. "No," she said clearly. The outlaw leader turned his attention to her. "And who are you?" "Nobody important, just someone who's tired of men like you deciding who gets to survive." "Is that right?" He seemed amused. "And what do you propose instead?" "I propose you leave. Now, while you still can." The outlaws laughed. "Lady, I don't think you understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." Nora's voice didn't waver despite her hands shaking on the rifle. "You're bullies. You survive by making people more scared of you than they are of death. But we're not scared anymore. We're angry, and angry people with nothing left to lose are dangerous. Touching speech? Won't stop bullets, though." "No, but it might make you think twice about whether this ranch is worth dying for, because some of you will die if you attack. Maybe all of you if we get lucky. Are we worth that risk?" The leader's smile faded. "You're bluffing. Try me." For a long moment, nobody moved. The outlaw leader studied Nora like he was trying to determine if she meant it. Then he looked at Harlan, at the armed defenders, at the fortified ranch that had seemed like an easy target days ago. His expression shifted, not quite fear, but calculation, reassessing odds. Then he turned his horse. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Nora replied. "You just don't know it yet." The outlaws withdrew to confer, their voices carrying on cold air but words unclear. Nora lowered her rifle, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Harlan appeared beside her. "That was insane." "I know. It might have just gotten us all killed. Or it might have saved us." Nora watched the outlaws arguing among themselves. They were expecting victims. We gave them a fight before it even started. That changes things. Or makes them angry enough to attack harder. Maybe. They waited. Minutes stretched into eternity. The outlaws kept conferring, their body language growing more agitated. Then gunfire erupted. But not from the outlaws. From behind them. Riders poured over the ridge, ranchers from farther north, attracted by smoke from the Morrison fire, armed and angry and tired of living in fear. Maybe 15 of them, not enough to turn the tide completely, but enough to make Black Hollow's odds much worse. The outlaws found themselves caught between two forces. Their easy raid suddenly a potential massacre. Their leader made the smart choice. He signaled retreat. Black Hollow scattered, riding north fast, leaving behind threats and bluster, but no violence. The new arrivals pursued for a while, then returned, whooping with victory. "Did we win?" someone asked uncertainly. "For today," Harlan said. "For today we won." The celebration was muted. Everyone understood this was a temporary victory, that Black Hollow might come back, that the threat hadn't disappeared, just retreated. But for now, they were alive. They'd stood together and survived. The family stayed another week, waiting to see if the outlaws would return. They didn't. Word spread through the valley that Black Hollow had left the territory entirely, moving to easier hunting grounds in the next county over. Whether that was true or just hopeful rumor, nobody knew. But slowly, families started returning to their own ranches, taking with them supplies shared and friendships formed and the knowledge that they didn't have to face the frontier alone. Charlotte left last, embracing Nora at her wagon. "You did good," she said. "We all did." "No, you did something nobody else could have. You made them remember how to be a community instead of just survivors." Charlotte climbed up. "Don't be a stranger, and if you ever need anything, anything at all, you send word." "Same to you." Charlotte drove off, and suddenly the ranch felt empty despite the 8 people who'd always lived there. Nora found Harlan at the fence line that evening, staring out at land that had nearly been taken from him. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I almost lost everything. That I almost got my boys killed because I was too proud to ask for help sooner." He turned to her. "Thank you. For pushing me. For making me see what I couldn't see on my own. You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe, but eventually might have been too late." Harlan reached into his pocket and pulled out the rusted iron key she'd used that first night. "You unlocked more than a door when you came here. You unlocked a family that had locked itself away from living." Nora took the key, surprised he'd kept it. "What do I do with this now?" "Whatever you want. It's yours. This place is yours. We're yours." He said it simply, stating fact. "If you want to leave, I'd understand. You didn't sign up for outlaws and near death, and I'm not leaving." "You sure? Because I wouldn't blame Harlan." Nora waited until he looked at her. "I'm not leaving. This is home now. You're home. The boys are home. Where else would I go?" He nodded, emotion crossing his weathered face too quickly to identify. Then he did something unexpected. He hugged her. It was brief and awkward, and neither of them quite knew what to do with their arms. But it was real. When he pulled back, there were tears in his eyes. "She would have liked you," he said quietly. "My wife. She would have liked you a lot." Then he walked away before Nora could respond, leaving her standing at the fence with the key in her hands and the setting sun painting everything gold. Life didn't become easy after that. Winter still had teeth, supplies still ran low, cattle still got sick. The boys still fought. Harlan still struggled with expressing emotions that weren't exhaustion or worry. But something fundamental had shifted. Thomas smiled more. Eli stopped talking about leaving. Cade's anger mellowed into something closer to determination. Porter found his voice again. Reeve remained quiet, but less haunted. And Rue finally started acting like a 4-year-old instead of a miniature adult, playing instead of surviving. Spring came late but fierce, melting snow and revealing land that had survived another winter. Grass pushed through frozen ground. Wildflowers appeared in impossible places. Birds returned, filling the air with sound that wasn't wind. The ranch came back to life. On the first truly warm day, Nora worked in the garden she was trying to establish, a small plot near the house where she hoped to grow vegetables come summer. Her hands were dirty, her back ached, and she was happier than she'd been in years. Rue appeared beside her, holding a handful of seeds. "Can I help plant?" he asked. "Of course." They worked together in comfortable silence, putting seeds into earth, covering them gently, hoping they'd grow. Nora? Rue said after a while. Hmm? Are you my ma now? The question stopped her hands. I don't know. What do you think? Rue considered seriously. I think Ma was Ma, but you're something too, something good. What am I? You're Nora. He said it like that explained everything. And that's enough. She pulled him close, this boy who'd been trying to cook on a stool when she arrived, who'd learned not to expect help, who'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. Yeah, she whispered. That's enough. That evening, the whole family gathered for supper, a real meal, not rationed portions, but actual food in amounts that satisfied. Laughter filled the room, stories were shared. Even Harlan smiled. After everyone had eaten, Thomas stood up awkwardly. I just wanted to say something, he began, about this family, about how we almost didn't make it, about how everything changed when... He looked at Nora. When someone showed up who refused to let us fail. Thomas, let me finish. He cleared his throat. We were falling apart, all of us. And you put us back together, not because you had to, because you cared enough to try. So thank you for staying, for fighting, for being exactly what we needed. The other boys nodded agreement. Even Reeve looked directly at Nora with something like gratitude in his dark eyes. Harlan raised his coffee cup. To family, the one we're born into and the one we choose. Everyone raised their cups, coffee for the adults, water for the boys. To family, they echoed. Nora looked around the table at faces that had been strangers months ago, that had become something more important than she'd known she needed. These flawed, broken, stubborn people who'd fought and struggled and survived together. She thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach expecting hardship and finding something worse. A family collapsing under the weight of grief and isolation and pride. That woman had been looking to save herself by escaping St. Louis. Instead, she'd saved an entire valley by refusing to let good people destroy themselves quietly. The lesson wasn't complicated. It wasn't poetic. It was simple and brutal and true. Sometimes survival isn't about being strong enough to stand alone. It's about being brave enough to admit you can't. It's about building connections instead of walls. It's about choosing to fight for something bigger than yourself, even when every logical part of your brain says you should run. Nora had learned that in a dress shop in St. Louis, sewing until her hands bled to avoid facing grief. She'd learned it again in a proxy marriage to a man she'd never met. She'd learned it watching 6 boys try to be men before they were ready. And she'd learned it one more time standing in front of outlaws with a rifle she barely knew how to use, betting everything on the power of people choosing to stand together instead of fall apart separately. None of it had been easy. Most of it had been terrifying. All of it had been worth it. Because at the end of the day, the things worth having were the things you fought for. The people worth keeping were the ones who fought beside you. And the life worth living was the one you built from pieces, imperfect and struggling, but yours. Nora had arrived at this ranch with nothing but a rusted iron key and resolve worn thin by too many losses. She'd leave it, if she ever left it, with something much more valuable, a family, a home, a purpose, and the knowledge that she'd taken something broken and helped make it whole again. Not perfect, never perfect, but whole enough to keep growing. Years later, when travelers passed through Sorrow Creek asking about the woman who'd stood down Black Hollow, the old ranchers would smile and point toward the Greer land. That ranch survived when everyone expected it to fail, they'd say. And the woman who made it happen? She started with nothing but a key and a stubborn refusal to quit, taught a whole valley how to fight for what mattered. And if you visited the Greer ranch on a spring evening when the wildflowers were blooming, you'd find Nora in her garden, probably with Rue or one of the other boys helping, dirt under her fingernails and peace in her expression. She'd look up, smile that small smile that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she'd accomplished, and go back to planting. Because that's what she did. She planted seeds. She nurtured growth. She refused to let things die that could be saved. And somewhere along the way, in the process of saving a broken family on a failing frontier ranch, she'd saved herself too. Not from poverty or hardship or danger, from loneliness, from purposelessness, from the slow death of surviving without living. The rusted iron key sat on her dresser still, a reminder of the door she'd opened that first night. But she rarely looked at it anymore. She didn't need to. The life she'd built was reminder enough.